The house felt different without Daniel. It wasn't just the absence of his voice or the sound of his steady footsteps. It was the way the air itself seemed to stretch, thick and heavy, pressing against Olivia's skin. The routine remained unchanged. Wake up, make coffee, scroll mindlessly through her phone, but everything felt distant, muted, as if she were watching her own life from the outside. Daniel had been away on business trips before, but this time, something felt different. The loneliness wasn't just an empty space beside her in bed, it was inside her, coiling tightly around her chest. She barely noticed the way her hands trembled when she reached for her cup. Or maybe she did, and she just didn't want to admit why. The doorbell rang, startling her out of her thoughts. She smoothed down the silk of her robe and walked toward the door, unlocking it with a soft click. When she opened it, Ethan stood there, leaning casually against the frame, his lips curled into a familiar, mischievous smirk. "Didn't think I'd find you still lounging around," he teased, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. His voice was warm, rich like aged whiskey, and it sent a ripple through her, one she hadn't felt in a long time. She let out a small laugh, shaking her head. "I wasn't expecting company." Ethan dropped his duffel bag by the couch, stretching, his arms over his head, his muscles flexing under the tightness of his black t-shirt. He looked different from the last time she'd seen him, rougher around the edges, yet impossibly more alluring. His jaw was dusted with stubble, and his dark eyes gleamed with something unreadable as they settled on her. "I figured I'd crash." "Here for a couple of nights?" he said, his gaze sweeping over the living room before landing back on her. "You don't mind, do you?" Olivia swallowed. She should have said something, should have made an excuse or told him it wasn't a good time. But the truth was, she didn't mind. In fact, the idea of having someone around, someone who wasn't Daniel, felt like a relief. "Of course not," she said, offering a small smile. "Make yourself at home." Ethan grinned, running a hand through his tousled hair. "Good. I could use a little peace and quiet." She wasn't sure what he meant by that, but the way he looked at her, like, he saw through the perfectly curated life she had built, made her stomach tighten. He had always had that effect on her, ever since they were younger. But now, with Daniel gone and the house wrapped in an unsettling stillness, Ethan's presence felt even more potent, more dangerous. And for the first time in a long while, Olivia didn't want to resist it. The first night passed uneventfully, but Olivia couldn't ignore the shift in energy within the house. Every sound felt amplified. Every glance exchanged with Ethan carried an unspoken weight. He moved through the space as if he belonged there, effortlessly claiming the living room, the kitchen, even the air she breathed. She caught herself watching, him more than she should have. How his fingers drummed absently on the counter as he made coffee, how the muscles in his forearms tensed when he gripped his mug. He wasn't oblivious to her gaze either. More than once, she noticed the slight smirk playing on his lips when he caught her looking. That evening, she found herself sitting beside him on the couch, a glass of wine in her hand, the dim lighting casting flickering shadows across the room. The conversation flowed easily, as it always had between them, but there was something different now. A tension humming beneath the surface, a pull neither of them acknowledged but both clearly felt. "So tell me," Ethan said, his voice lower, more intimate than before. "How's married life treating you?" Olivia hesitated. She could have given the usual response, the polite lie that everything was fine, that Daniel was wonderful, that she was happy. But something about Ethan, about the way he was looking at her, made her want to tell the truth. "It's steady," she admitted, swirling the wine in her glass. "Predictable." Ethan leaned in slightly, his arm resting along the back of the couch, his fingers just inches from her shoulder. "And is that what you want?" Her breath hitched. He was too close, his voice too smooth, his presence too intoxicating. She knew she should move, put space between them, but she didn't. Instead, she met his gaze, her pulse fluttering wildly beneath her skin. "I don't know anymore," she whispered. A slow, knowing smile curved his lips. "That's an interesting answer." The air between them grew heavy, charged with something dangerous and undeniable. And as the silence stretched, Olivia knew this was only the beginning. The days passed in a blur of unspoken tension. Ethan was everywhere, leaning against the counter as she cooked, lounging on the couch with that same infuriatingly knowing smirk. And Olivia found herself drawn to him in ways she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. One evening, she walked into the kitchen and found him standing by the sink, sipping a glass of whiskey. The room was dimly lit, the amber liquid catching the soft glow. He turned to her as she approached, his gaze trailing over her with quiet intensity. "Can't sleep?" he asked. She shook her head. "Too many thoughts." Ethan set his glass down and stepped closer. "Like what?" Olivia swallowed, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Like whether I should tell you to leave." He studied her for a moment before reaching up, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. His touch was light, almost hesitant, but it sent a jolt through her. "And do you want me to?" She opened her mouth, but no words came. Because the truth was, she didn't. She wanted him to stay. She wanted the temptation, the danger, the reminder that she was still capable of feeling something other than routine. Instead of answering, she stepped back, the distance between them charged with a decision she wasn't ready to make. Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his hair before nodding. "I'll be here if you change your mind," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. And as Olivia walked away, she realized she already had.